is a good segue into what we're about to talk about. We're getting into, this is our third part now in social injustice, part 2 in our theology of public life. And we're talking about what we've deemed or termed the morality of the new religion, the law, if you will, of the new religion. And I was thinking about that with respect to our circumstances, and 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 3 came to mind, where Paul says that though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh, for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for pulling down strongholds, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ, and being ready to punish all disobedience when your obedience is fulfilled. And just thinking about that in terms of our current circumstances and the battle, if you will, that we see raging before our very eyes for the heart and soul of our country, if you will, and certainly the hearts and souls of people. And this is not a war that we're waging against flesh and blood. It's not one political party or the political people in power that are propagating this war. It's principalities and powers. This is an effort on the part of the enemy, the adversary, Satan. And we see his schemes at work here in our circumstances. And when we spot that, we can take heart in the sense that we know God is in control. God is sovereign over all these things. And that he is working about his perfect plan through his perfect providence to execute his will. And we know that'll be done, and we look forward to the day when that comes to full and final consummation. But while we're here in this flesh, and while we're here at this time, we battle, and we're to continue the work. And so we do that thinking through this subject, the theology of public life, with the intention of preparing ourselves, arming ourselves, if you will, with an understanding of what's going on, an understanding of our circumstances, so that we might apply biblical wisdom to our circumstances and understand best how to address the issues that are involved in it. And so we're going to talk more this morning. We're back on track after vaccination mandates last week. We're back on track with social injustice, that's what we're calling it, and the morality of the new religion. Social justice is the morality of our modern day form of secular humanism, which our culture is largely, quickly, very rapidly adopting as the theology, if you will, or the religion of this country, but certainly it's spreading around the world at the same time. And so we want to talk this morning again about social justice and how secular humanism has co-opted Marxist ideology, if you will, as the morality of the new religion. And as we get to that, there's a handout available at the welcome desk. At the top of that handout is just an outline of what we're going to go through today. There's a quote there by Thomas Sowell. And if you've not read Thomas Sowell, I think Thomas Sowell professes to be a Christian. I'm not sure if Thomas Sowell is an actual Christian, but is a sociologist, an economist. I think he has made his bread and butter in economics, but very, very smart man and very helpful in sort of analyzing our current circumstances. And Thomas Sowell said this to get us started. The belief that disparities in incomes, right, and that's essentially at the root of the envy, the institutionalized greed and covetousness and envy that we see in our current circumstances, really that's the essence of it. Is a disparity in income. We hear a lot today about income redistribution or wealth redistribution. The reason for that is envy. It's this classic textbook biblical greed and not being content with what the Lord has provided. And Thomas Sowell said that the belief that disparities in incomes are indicators of disparities in the treatment of those with lower incomes is part of a more general set of assumptions that some one particular factor is the key or dominant factor behind differences in outcomes. In other words, what we'd like to be able to do is boil all of the problems that we see in society and culture today. We'd like to be able to boil all of that down to one simple thing. And Thomas Sowell would say that is disparities in income. The world would say that's disparities in opportunity or disparities in outcome, disparities in income. We would say, what? Sin, right? Sin. It all boils down to wickedness, depravity, the depravity of man. We can see that from our perspective and need to approach this from that perspective, but this is the way the world is thinking about it. He says in the early 20th century, the key factor behind economic, intellectual, and other disparities among different groups was assumed to be genetics. That's an important distinction. You go back just a couple of decades, one generation, and what you see there as the reason for those disparities is genetics. It's the DNA. Minorities just aren't genetically superior to white people. And so they suffer the consequences of their genetic inferiority, which is absurd, but that's where things were. That's called racism. It's called discrimination. It's setting up a faulty assumption, but that's where things were just a generation ago. Now, that assumption of genetics has been replaced, and it's been replaced by racism. That view, Sowell says, was dominant then as the opposite view today, that disparities in outcomes imply discrimination. American colleges and universities had hundreds of courses on eugenics then, just as many academic institutions today have courses and whole departments teaching that outcome disparities imply discrimination. So in a matter of a generation, we see a shift. And it's no less a shift in this worldly racist ideology, but it is a shift in cause. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today through social justice. Social justice has co-opted that notion as the foundation or the ground on which it is based. And I think we'll see that as we work through the subject this morning together. All right. In our first session together, we introduced the concept of social justice. Right? We introduced the concept, attempted to define it. We discussed the rise of the new religion, which is simply a modern form of secular humanism. God has been dethroned by secular humanism. Man has been deified by secular humanism, and it's all about our own personal identity, our own personal desires. Literally, as older generations of professing Christians are dying off, a newer generation of nuns, N-O-N-E-S, are rapidly replacing them. These are millennials who predominantly have no religious affiliation and qualify themselves as nuns when filling out census forms and applications and those sorts of things. And the nuns overwhelmingly now espouse humanist and atheist ideology. Those two often go hand in hand, humanist and atheist. This replacement marks the death of, at the very least, a tradition here of nominal Christianity in our country that began with our founding. It replaces, or it marks the death of that tradition and marks a replacement of it. That ideal, that ethic no longer represents the values of our country, so to speak. It's rapidly being replaced by this secular humanism, the nuns. With the death of that religious or so-called Christian traditionalism is the death of the objective morality that goes hand in hand with it. As Christianity is increasingly seen as oppressive and as useless and not relative to anything we're doing today on the part of many young adults, the morality associated with Christianity is also dying with it. That morality is seen to be oppressive and a structure of control, not liberating, as secular humanism is. And so that morality is dying with it. Biblical morality is now mocked, and it is mocked as antiquated and oppressive. Until now, secular humanism would have struggled to unify itself under a moral umbrella, or would have struggled to unify itself around a morality. We need morality. Secular humanism, religions need some form of morality. The word of God, or the law of God written upon the heart of man. The law of God is woven into our DNA. We are moral creatures because we're made in the image of God. So we need morality. Anytime there's this effort to replace true religion with false religion, which happens all the time, all around the world, there's an effort or a need to replace the morality of that true religion with a false morality, a counterfeit morality. And so until now, secular humanism struggled to do that. Atheism and Darwinian evolution is sort of mutually exclusive with morality, in the sense that morality doesn't evolve. It comes about through nurture. And so secular humanism has had difficulty latching onto a morality until now. It's lacked a moral fervor, if you will, a moral fervency, moral enthusiasm. So it's secular humanism then as a religion, which it is. Secular humanism is a theology. Secular humanism has lacked the moral fervor, if you will, of an Islam, because it doesn't have the fake morality of Islam to back it up. It lacks the moral fervor of false religion in the past that generated crusades and inquisitions, and those kinds of things, because it lacks that moral fervency. And so to generate that kind of self-righteous fervor, secular humanism needs a morality, and until now it hasn't had it. But what evolution has done for humanist explanations of origins, social justice has done for a humanist sense of morality. So what evolution is to humanism's explanation of the origins of all things, social justice is to humanism's need for a morality. Does that make sense? So social justice has largely latched on. You have this two-part thing that's going on at the same time. You have the elites, those who in academia, prominent writers who are writing about this stuff and writing about it in an intellectual level and propagating it at an intellectual level and filling colleges with professors who hold to this nonsense, this garbage. And at the same time, there's this groundswell of grassroots support for it that grows from the bottom up. And you have social activism on the part of people who haven't read the first word of any of those academic elites, but are grasping onto the very same thing in a grassroots way, and it's gaining quickly in popularity, obviously. So secular humanism has adopted then, or co-opted, an ideology of social justice to fill an otherwise indefinable vacuum or vague moral center. Until now, it's been vague or indefinable. Now we have our morality. Not the Ten Commandments, not the law of God. It's social justice. It's fighting for the oppressed against oppressors. Social justice, as just by way of review, rooted in the conflict theory of Karl Marx. It's where we get Marxism from. Friedrich Engels. Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels saw the history of civilization not in terms of lost or saved, not in terms of sinful, sinners, and redeemed, but in terms of class struggle between the oppressed and their oppressors, between victims and their victimizers, the haves and the have-nots, right? And when what Karl Marx primarily saw as an economic struggle, you could say really rooted and grounded in money, income disparity, the Frankfurt School in the early 20th century saw those social problems as, or those economic problems as social. They were sociological or philosophical, not just economic. And it's interesting to me, if you read anything about the Frankfurt School, they're fighting for the ideals that in a matter of 20, 30 years would produce World War II and the spread of fascism in Germany, where the Frankfurt School is, would lead to fascism in Germany under Hitler and communism in Russia under Stalin. And so that's where the philosophy, this ideology that is spreading today began in the Frankfurt School, and it was that spread from the Frankfurt School that provided the seeds, if you will, of the spread of fascism in Germany and communism in Russia. That's where that ideology leads. And with fascism in Germany and communism in Russia, one of the only two places that fascism and communism spread, but there were millions and millions of people who were murdered as a result of the spread of that ideology, as a direct result of the spread of that ideology. And that's the ideology that has taken root in our country today. Same ideology, different generation, different flavor, same ideology, okay? And that's where that ideology led back then. Let's see where this ideology leads us today. The conflict theory of Karl Marx became the critical theory behind the modern social justice movement. When you hear the words critical race theory or critical theory, what that is a development of Karl Marx's conflict theory. The conflict between classes of oppressed and their oppressors now has become the critical theory of conflict between classes, oppressed and oppressors, but a different set of classes. Critical theorists from the Frankfurt School began researching systemic causes of inequity between classes of people. Why are there differences in outcome between different classes of people? Why do we see that? And listen, let me say at the outset that race doesn't matter. Race doesn't matter. What does matter is racism. Racism, discrimination can cause disparities in outcome, but there are many things that can cause disparity in outcome. Geography can cause disparities in outcome. If you're near a river or near a desert, right? That's going to cause disparities in outcome. If you're near a population center or if you're all by yourself in the western United States with no protection, that's going to cause disparity of outcome, all right? Today, if you have, for example, if you have parents that raise you in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, they read to you from the Bible, they read to you from books, they spend time with you. Mom is at home with the kids, dad is working to support the family. You have both mom and dad in the household, all these things, right? Versus dad sleeps around, has a kid out of wedlock, abandons mother and baby, and leaves. They never hear from him again. Now mom is required to work outside of the home to support her family and has to put her child in daycare, is absolutely maxed out at home and has very little time to spend with her child, right? Disparities in outcome. Those are factors that will cause disparity in outcome. So racism isn't the only factor. Racism is certainly a factor, but not the only factor, okay? There are many things that cause this inequity. Critical theorists began to look at systemic causes of inequity between classes of people to understand the corrupted nature of society. And what do we mean by corrupted nature of society? It's corrupted because we also see all these differences in outcome. People are not equal. And so the fact that people are not equal is evidence of injustice. The fact that people are not equal is evidence of inequity, okay? That injustice, that inequity is inflicted upon these various classes, and they are then the oppressed. The ones who inflict that injustice are the oppressors, okay? That's where critical theory relates to Marxism. Critical theory is not merely an analytical tool, the way that some would like to say that it is. If you listen to some of those debates that went on, for example, in the Southern Baptist Convention, and you've got pastors up there standing at the podium saying that critical theory is just an analytical tool, that is a bunch of garbage. Critical theory is not simply an analytical tool. Critical theory is a worldview. It sees our world as a class struggle between oppressed classes and oppressor classes. It boils down everything to a faulty assumption or a false premise and designs or attempts to want to solve the problem on the basis of a faulty premise or a faulty solution. It has nothing to do with Christianity, right? It has nothing to do with God's providence, God's law, God's sovereignty, God's purpose, God's plan. It has nothing to do with any of that. It has everything to do with what we would say is, as we'll see, institutionalized covetousness, institutionalized envy, institutionalized discontentment, right? Those things. And so to try to presume to say that this is simply an analytical tool that's helpful to the church is a lie from the pit. And it has not only infiltrated the church under that false narrative, it has divided the church under that, which is what it does. It spreads, it foments, it doesn't solve racism, it foments racism. It doesn't solve or heal divisions, it foments division. It causes discord. It causes contention, causes strife. And we see all that just from the toe that it has through the front door of the professing church today. That's what critical race theory is doing in the church. Critical race theory, we can see in our culture, is blowing our culture up. All right, we'll see that more as we go. Okay, I can get off my soapbox for a second there. Critical theory is not an analytical tool. Critical theory is a worldview. It's an ideology. It's a philosophy. It's a way of thinking, a way of reasoning, a way of seeing things. It's a lens. It's like putting on a pair of glasses and looking through those glasses at everything that's going on. And just like to a hammer, everything is a nail. To critical theorists, everything is a social problem that can be solved by eradicating the world of oppressors and upholding and uplifting the oppressed. Critical theory identifies problems and then assigns a cause. Oftentimes, the problems that it analyzes or identifies, it identifies or prescribes or diagnoses incorrectly, and the cause is often diagnosed improperly. In the same way that to a hammer, everything is a nail. Critical theorists, every societal problem is the result of injustice. Every societal problem is not the result of sin, not the result of man's depravity, not because of a want or a need for righteousness and following God's law, doing things God's way. It's the result of injustice. All of life is structured according to power, and particularly racial power dynamics, and any inequality that exists is caused by injustice. The concern of social justice is inequality, right? The concern of social justice is inequity, or what they would characterize as unfairness, right? Unfairness, inequality. And we're not talking about equality of opportunity or inequality with respect to opportunity. We're talking about inequality with respect to outcome. There's a big difference between those two. Social justice sees any inequality with respect to outcome to be caused by inequity or unfairness. Inequity is caused by injustice. And then social justice attempts to assign a solution. Social justice, then, is the morality of the new religion. Secular humanists, the nuns, millennials, those who wouldn't know what a secular humanist is, would sort of adopt that, I don't believe in God. Maybe I believe in God, but I don't even acknowledge him. The world is on its own. But I don't believe in God. I believe in our right to live our lives in a way that is authentic for us, considering our own personal identity, right? I believe in me. That's secular humanism. The secular humanist until now has lacked a unifying morality, and secular humanists have largely grabbed onto. They have lurched to lay hold of social justice as their morality. Why is that important to a secular humanist? We need that, or fallen men need morality to placate a guilty conscience. They need false religion because eternity is bound up in the heart of man, and they need false religion to give them the sense that they are moral and right with the gods that be, right with their own conscience, by doing good. We're self-righteous hypocrites by nature. And so how can you be self-righteous without a moral center? So secular humanists have grappled onto, laid hold of social justice as morality. This religion even has its own conversion experience, right? When someone has their eyes opened to the systemic causes of injustice, when they have their eyes open to the systemic causes of inequity, they finally see themselves for how they themselves have been complicit in causing it, or complicit in supporting it, or complicit by just being a part of it. They've been guilty all along, and they haven't seen it until now. But now that they see it, they're woke, right? That's where woke comes from. That's what woke means. It's essentially the secular humanist religion's conversion experience. When they finally see it, they become woke. They're converted. as it were. Once woke, secular humanism as a religion calls for works of penance, like other false religions, namely Roman Catholicism. Right? Call for works of penance. Social action is required. Confession is involved. You need to go on Instabook and make a TikTok about how you're now a racist and you never knew it before, but now you see it as it is, and how you're going to fight for the underprivileged, and you're a white teenage girl from suburbia, with 2 cars in a garage, sitting in her air conditioning, talking about being oppressed, So confession is involved. Social action is required. It's not good enough to simply oppose social injustices. You have to take action against them. If you're not a part of the solution, then you are the problem, right? It takes not just an acknowledgement, but you've got to be avidly active in the fight, so to speak. There are even those who call for reparations, and we can talk about that some in the future. But all this boils down to atonement. This is the false religion's view or means of atoning for their sin, right? This is secular humanism's version of atonement. We know that in Christianity, we can't atone for our own sins. We are sinful by nature. We have broken the laws of God. We are hopeless and destitute in and of ourselves, bankrupt before God. We have the Lord Jesus Christ, who came to make provision for our sin. He lived a perfect, sinless life and then went to the cross as a sinless sacrifice to atone for our sins. He paid our penalty in our place. This is nothing more, secular humanism is nothing more than another worldly religion seeking to atone for its own sins through good works, through works of righteousness, which they have done. This is nothing more than another world religion. This one is particularly dangerous, particularly devastating, and would submit to you that I think is particularly lasting. This is one that I think will see at the end, that will be destroyed with the brightness of his coming. Right? This is all a system of religious belief. This is the false Marxist morality of modern-day secular humanism, the new religion. This worldview, this ideology, is most commonly referred to under the umbrella of CRT, or critical race theory, CT, critical theory. CRT has come to embrace not only race, though, but critical race theory is sort of an umbrella term for any oppressed class. And critical race theory, or critical theory, has come to embrace gender, age, and every sexual deviancy known to man, all the alphabet letters. CRT has come to embrace all of that. And where the causes of those overlapping oppressed classes, when they intersect, or where they intersect, you have what's called intersectionality. So intersectionality is where you have, for example, a woman is in an oppressed class because she's a woman, and she's oppressed by white males, okay? A woman is one oppressed class. There's more credibility, if you will, given, more weight to her voice, or more weight to her experience, more opportunity to speak into our culture if she's a black woman. That's what you call intersectionality. 2 oppressed classes now represented by one person. If she's a black lesbian woman, all the better, right? You see how intersectionality works. Those are what these terms mean, so that when you're reading their garbage, you understand what they're talking about, right? They just use the terms with no definition. Okay. All oppressed victims are welcome under the tent. All oppressed victims welcome under the tent of critical theory, or critical race theory, except one. And that is the white, heterosexual, Christian male. The white, heterosexual, Christian male is the chief oppressor, okay? He's not a victim. He's not oppressed. He's not oppressed in any way. Not a victim in any way. He is the one who created this mess in the first place, right? So the white heterosexual, Christian man, and you leave off any one of those adjectives, it's just as bad. It increases in awfulness the more adjectives you add, right? If it's just a white male, that's bad enough. But white, heterosexual, Christian male really captures the full deplorability of this one. And what you have here in identifying classes of people in this way is what is happening in our country before our very eyes is Satan's reformation. We are about to celebrate Reformation Day and Christianity's Reformation in the 16th century when Martin Luther sparked or ignited the Protestant Reformation by nailing the 95 Theses to the door of the church at Wittenberg. We're about to celebrate that at the end of this month or remember that. And yet this social justice, the morality of secular humanism, what's going on before our very eyes today is, if you will, a reformation, but it's a satanic reformation. This is Satan's counterfeit reformation. We are seeing reformation of our entire cultural fabric, our societal makeup, the ways that we think. When I say we, I mean our society as a whole, not us Christians, but the way that we imagine things are and should be, the way that we see the world, all of that is being reformed right now. And it's been this snowball building and building and building up until this point. And what you have now is Satan's reformation. This is Satan's great awakening as more and more people are becoming woke, right? Even making inroads into professing churches. A church who's woke is not a church. So making inroads into professing churches. This is like Satan's great awakening. Satan's grand counterfeit religion. Secular humanism believes it has dethroned God, deified man. Secular humanism has no sin of its own. It's been washed clean of its sin by becoming woke. So it's washed itself clean of its own sin. The sinners are the oppressors, and they have to be dealt with, right? He has declared himself to be innocent because he's woke. He's assigned all the guilt there is or ever was to a scapegoat. And that scapegoat is class power struggles between oppressed and oppressors. The scapegoat is the oppressor. If you guys remember the scapegoat from the Old Testament, right? The priest would lay his hand upon the scapegoat, transferring the sins of the people to that scapegoat, and then would release the scapegoat outside the camp into the wilderness, right? And that was expiation. That is the removal of guilt. Our guilt, as it were, ran off into the wilderness when Christ took our sin and shame upon himself and bore it on the cross, right? That's why Hebrews says for us to go outside the camp to him bearing his reproach. Jesus Christ was crucified outside the camp like a scapegoat. Our guilt removed, our guilt expiated. Hebrews calls us to go outside the camp to him, bearing his reproach, with him, with our elder brother, bearing his reproach. The scapegoat, is oppressors, societal structures, in particular, white, in our country, white, heterosexual Christian men, is the scapegoat that should be run off into the wilderness. In all the structures, all the institutions, all the things that white, heterosexual Christian men established and erected in order to maintain their power over oppressed classes, all of that has to be torn down. All of it has to be torn down. And when you start thinking about the structures and the institutions that have been established, in particular in our country, by white heterosexual Christian men, professing Christian men, it's everything from our very form of government to what they call the nuclear family, to what we think of as industry. It's everything to do with our country. And all of that has to be torn down, rethought, and then rebuilt in order to uphold or further the concerns of the oppressed. Okay. This scapegoat carries upon him the great humanist sins of misogyny. Right? It's discrimination against women, right? Misogyny. Patriarchy. In other words, unlawful authority structures. Who put men in charge, right? Why should they be in charge of anything? Right? Patriarchy, authoritarianism. In the eyes of social justice, any authority is authoritarianism. We should tear down authority structures. Authority structures are used by oppressors to control the oppressed. And so until there's a destruction of authority, a tearing down of authority, we can't be equal. We can't be equal. As long as there's authority, we're not equal. Right? Homophobia, transphobia, all those phobias, racist. This one is a racist, Nazi, hater, right? Those terms that we hear describing oppressors. And the woke, religious, social justice zealot revels in his self-righteous superiority like a Pharisee. Now think about that with me for a second. What do you see? Everywhere, those considered to be oppressors shouted down, other ideas shouted down. I mean, it is, you go on, you see some of these interactions that take place on college campuses today. It calls to mind for me like the Pharisees standing in Pilate's court after the kangaroo court conviction of Jesus Christ, this unreasonable, irrational mob irrationally calling for the crucifixion of a man who Pilate says himself, I can find no fault in him, right? It's irrational. It's unreasonable. And that's the mob today. And that, listen, we're talking about, because the world has done this, the world is dividing everything up according to race, according to classes, gender, age, sex, all these divisions that are taking place. We see divisions all across this room, right? But it's not the case with us. Right? None of this is the case with us. We don't see things through that lens. We cannot see things through that lens. It is horribly destructive. So all that to say is that all of it, that part of it really doesn't matter. Right? It really doesn't matter. If it weren't white, heterosexual Christian men, well then it might be black, homosexual women. Right? It's like, it doesn't matter. That part of it is irrelevant. This is what the world has focused on. And in a sense now, racism obviously does matter. Racism is a grievous sin. But one of the reasons that I think that social justice, our secular humanism, has co-opted this form of social justice as its morality is because of our sinful past. There is a very real and very recent, in the grand scheme of things, deplorably wicked history associated with our country. And so it's very, 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 very easy, very convenient, very expedient to connect that wicked past with all of the social problems that we see today and marry the two. And that is a very, very compelling narrative, right? It wouldn't work any other way. If you remember, like in the 80s and 90s, that was when I was still an old guy and a lot of you weren't even thought of yet. In the 80s, it was a big industry, right? It was Wall Street brokers, Wall Street traders that were the enemy. You still hear about it today. The 1%. The 1% is the enemy. Now, I'm sorry, the 1% isn't a compelling enough enemy to stir up this kind of religious zeal, right? It would take more than the 1% to do that. The Wall Street traders, a whole bunch of people in the 90s in covetousness took out a bunch of loans they couldn't repay. But who is at fault for them taking out loans they couldn't repay? Those awful banks, right? Big business, right? So there's always, been this scapegoat. Really, the sort of the scapegoat is a bit of an irrelevant thing. It's the sin in men's hearts. It's the way that we see the world. It's the philosophy, the ideology. And this particular Marxist ideology has found traction in our country where all those other things haven't, right? Not in the same way. And so that's why we see it in just exploding right now before our very eyes. This religious ideology has infiltrated every aspect of our society. And listen, they're not merely calling for redistribution, right? We're talking about inequity. So the way to solve inequity to a social justice warrior, the way to solve inequity is redistribution. They're not calling for just redistribution. They're calling for retribution. Retribution. It's not enough just to redistribute. We've got to tear down and mock and ridicule and harangue those evil institutions and put up good institutions in their place. And this ideology's infected everything. It's infected our government. Think with me, okay? Think with me about the inroads that this has made in our culture today. It is everywhere in our government, in both parties. You've got both parties, one in particular that is all the way sold out, I think irretrievably so. One party gone, that's liberalism, progressivism. The Democrat Party is sold out to this garbage, sold out to it. And you've got the other party who toys around with it, who wants to placate it or wants to buy into it, who's weak and feckless in allowing the spread to continue, right? So neither party is guiltless in this. It's all over our government. It's all over our courts. Our court system. There is no hope in government. There is no hope in the courts. It was a majority conservative court that put Roe v. Wade in place. And that issue is coming up again for the court. I think it's in December. And let's see what a majority conservative court does today. Anybody want to bet? It's all over our politics. It's all over our schools, everywhere in our education. They're arguing about it right now in school boards across the country. There's no stopping that. Because it doesn't stop the mouth of that teacher in the public school who is sold out to it from teaching your kids that, whether it's in the curriculum or not. But all over the country, students are, they're learning the 1619 curriculum. All of this is spreading like wildfire in our school system. It's all throughout our journalism. Journalism is lost as a respectable institution. Journalism is gone. It is completely undermined, and it's been undermined by this. Journalistic standards, I can't think of someone who upholds them today. No one comes to mind, right? Journalism is lost. It is the enemy of the people, in that sense, if you want to get on that bandwagon. Our media, it's all over media. All over media. They're every news show. I saw something that somebody sent out about some new Superman thing coming out where Superman is kissing another guy. It is everywhere. All over our kids' shows, all over our media, all in our music. I'm really bad about listening to music without listening to words. I like music. But I can listen, and I'm listening to melody but I'm not really paying attention necessarily to the words. And there's been occasions where I'm listening to something that, maybe some old song, song was written back when I was, a young guy, when music was good, Commodores or something, and I'm listening to the words, and I'm just like, oh man, that's really bad. He's saying things in that song of a woman that can only be said of the Lord Jesus Christ, right? Can only be rightly said of God, and he's attributing those things. So it's, music, entertainment, our health institutions overrun with social justice. Our business, right now, what do we have? Businesses everywhere doing the government's bidding with respect to vaccination mandates. Our industry, our foreign relations. I had heard mention, there was, if I remember the story correctly, someone who's traveling, and they were in Paris, I believe it was. And in Paris, in a lot of these cities, you have embassies that are, right next to each other, embassies that are sort of in a district or a related area. And our embassy in Paris at the time was flying, not the American flag, but the rainbow pride, flag. That rainbow's ours, by the way. But flying that flag over the embassy. Ours was the only one, and that's the garbage that we're exporting around the world. In countries, our embassy will fly that flag in countries that absolutely oppose it. I think countries like Kenya, Uganda, absolutely, unequivocally oppose homosexuality, and yet our embassy in those countries will fly that flag. It's deplorable. It's all over our foreign relations, our policing. our public discourse, and it's even in our churches. There's not one place today in our society where this filth hasn't seeped in like a toxin. Not one place. Name me one place where it hasn't seeped other than this place, right? Right. It's in godly, Bible-believing, Bible-preaching, Bible-teaching churches like this one where we have not had to handle that with some force, right? Our brothers and sisters here have been exceedingly encouraging to me in that we, regardless of this false construct of race, there's one race, it's the human race. Our other races, we have different melanin counts. I want to say melatonin counts, but I know that's not right. Melanin counts, and that's it. There is one race, and so our brothers and sisters here, I think by God's grace alone, we see this biblically for what it is, but you go outside of a place like this, it is everywhere. It's at Publix, right? It's at the bank. It's everywhere. So let's look now quickly, because I've got to finish here. Look at their concept of justice. Next week, we're going to look at what the Bible has to say about justice, right? What do they say about justice? What is justice? First, how do social justice advocates see the concepts of justice and injustice? We're made in the image of God. Having been made in the image of God, we have a sense of justice woven into our being. We have a sense of right and wrong. We see the work of the law written upon our heart. However, fallen men are depraved, and their sense of justice has been corrupted by sin. Justice is always naturally, for the carnal mind, bent or twisted upon ourselves. Justice is always naturally or carnally twisted or bent upon ourselves. It has a self-serving interest. That's justice, according to the sinful, depraved man. We are, apart from Jesus Christ, supremely self-absorbed as fallen creatures, and that makes true justice impossible. What you get from fallen men is corrupted justice, perverted justice, justice bent inward upon itself. By what standard is justice to be determined? Who says what is fair and what isn't fair? In our age, it's certainly not those in authority, certainly not the Bible that's going to determine that in our age. It begins with the have-nots. The have-nots, those are the ones, the victims, the oppressed, those are the ones who determine what is just and what is fair. One, the pursuit of social justice, as defined by today's worldly philosophy, would result in equality. The pursuit of social justice is equality. What is justice? Justice is equality. What is injustice? Injustice is inequality or inequity. Social justice proponents are against inequality or against inequity, and not speaking of inequality that might exist between individuals within a class, right? Like an inequality between me and Sixto as two men. Sixto is far better looking than I am, so we are unequal in that respect. And we're not talking about inequality within a specific class. We're talking about inequality or inequity between classes of people, right? Between oppressed classes. So the evils of our society then are revealed in disparities between classes. Evil is revealed in disparities between classes. Those disparities reveal inequity, which is a faulty premise. Those disparities reveal inequity. Inequity is the result of injustice, which is also a faulty premise. And all injustice must be eradicated, and society must be rethought, restructured, and rebuilt. Two faulty concepts, faulty ideas, faulty premises lead to everything that you see going on today. Second, the equality that social justice advocates are pursuing is not equality of opportunity, it is equality of outcome. Thomas Sowell says essentially, if you're pursuing equality, you're pursuing a mirage. Nevertheless, equality of outcomes is an assumption that social justice begins with. It's natural and necessary to social justice to begin with an assumption that we should all be entirely equal. Equal incomes, equal wealth, equal jobs, equal health, equal, okay? So two fallacies then are employed by social justice advocates. One, disparities in economic incomes imply biased treatment. Remember, it's either genetics or discrimination. Genetics has gone the wayside. We don't believe that nonsense anymore, right? Now it's fully on discrimination, racism. It's interesting that a lot of the same people who believed in genetics, which is racism, back then believe in discrimination, or that it's discrimination or racism today, right? And the same people are on the same side of the fence. Disparities in economic outcomes imply biased treatment. That's one fallacy. Second fallacy, economic benefits gained through biased treatment may be redistributed. It would be right to take any benefit that is believed to have been acquired by means of opposing someone else or oppressing someone else. It's right to take that benefit and redistribute it to oppressed classes. So anyone who has wealth in this, listen, right, this is a faulty assumption. Anyone who has any kind of wealth in this country got that wealth on the back of an oppressed person. So that wealth should be taken from them and redistributed. There's a moral imperative to do that. It's morally right to do that. It's not theft in their mindset, right? It's not providence. It's not any of those things. It's not hard work. It's not whatever it is that led to that. It's not any of that. It's that wealth was gained at the expense of someone who has not. So that wealth, it is justifiable, right, moral, to take that and redistribute it to those who don't have it. It is right through legal or political or economic means to de-privilege whites and redistribute privilege to minority groups. Let me give you an example. I'm going to close with this. This is from the BLM site. If you can go to, I didn't know there was such a thing, a Wayback Machine. It's like Back to the Future, like with, a cartoon Wayback Machine. Is that what it is? You can go back, you can go on there and look up websites that have been taken down, like years ago, like what it looked like. Like this particular part of the Wayback Machine is in April of like 2018, I think it was. You can go back and see what the web looked like back then, so you can pull up Black Lives Matter site from 2018 and see what they used to have as their belief, their About Us, on their About Us page. And it gives you an indication of what they have since taken it down, because there's been an outcry against like some of those. They're Marxist. It is Marxism, straight hook and crook. It's Marxism, and so people are tend to respond to that opposed to it, and so they've changed their wording a lot. Still the same people, still the same ideology. They just cleaned up their wording. Right? Listen to this from the BLM site. We are guided by the fact that all Black lives matter, regardless of actual or perceived sexual identity, gender expression, economic status. Notice what comes first, right? It's weird to me, right? It is a little bizarre. All Black lives matter. All lives matter. But regardless of actual or perceived sexual identity, right? They begin there. Gender identity, gender expression, then comes economic status, ability, disability, religious beliefs or disbeliefs, immigration status or location. We make here, like this is just straight from their page, About Us, right? About Us. I'm not like cutting and pasting, right? Straight through their page. We make space for transgender brothers and sisters to participate and lead. It's odd to me that would be the place where this begins, and there's intersectionality here, obviously. But we are self-reflexive and do the work required to dismantle cisgender privilege. Heterosexual privilege, and uplift Black trans folk, especially Black trans women who continue to be disproportionately impacted by trans antagonistic violence. The first thing that struck me was I thought this was against standing opposed to racism against Black people, right? And I would be fully supportive of anything that was against racism against Black people. But this is something else, isn't it? It's interesting. We build a space that affirms Black women and is free from sexism, misogyny, and environments in which men are centered. We're against environments in which men are centered. We practice empathy. We engage comrades. That's a word that comes straight out of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, right? Straight out of Marx. We engage comrades with the intent to learn about and connect with their context, intersectionality. We make our spaces family-friendly and enable parents to fully participate with their children. We dismantle the patriarchal practice that requires mothers to work double shifts so they can mother in private even as they participate in public justice work. In other words, we don't like the traditional role of the mother. They would hate God's design for a family, for marriage, I'll tell you a funny story about that. We don't have time today. Want to, but we disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement. Is that Western prescribed? No, it really is Bible prescribed. It's creation ordinance prescribed. By supporting each other as extended families and villages. It's because in these communities and in communities across our country, regardless of race, deadbeat dads are rampant, like out of control, and there is fatherlessness exploding at a ridiculous rate, such that, speaking of BLM here, I want to say that the percentage among inner city black families having children, 78% of children born are born to single parent households. Unbelievable. So it takes a village. It shouldn't, but that's what they're faced with, right? They want to dismantle the patriarchal practice. They want to collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, or children are comfortable. They have to support each other as extended families. We foster a queer affirming network. We do so with the intention of freeing ourselves from the tight grip of heteronormative thinking, or rather the belief that all in the world are heterosexual unless he or she disclose otherwise. Interesting they use she, he there instead of, all the, we cultivate an intergenerational and communal network free from ageism. We believe that all people, regardless of age, show up with the capacity to lead and learn. We embody and practice justice, liberation, and peace in our engagements with one another. The enemies of this are clear, aren't they? Cisgender, heteronormative thinking, patriarchy, nuclear family, all based on one very large presumption. They're oppressed through white racism or white prejudice. Furthermore, that Christianity that incubates white privilege or white supremacy, Christianity incubates that and causes that, leads to it. So Christianity needs to be torn down. That's where you get the roots of black liberation theology. If you've ever listened to Reverend Cohn, there's with respect to black liberation theology, that's where that comes from. It all boils down to this. I deserve something that has been withheld from me. And I deserve it at the expense of the one who withheld it. Foments racism, foments division, foments hate, foments strife, foments contention. Let it never be named among us. Right? Let's be clear about these things and steer very, very, very clear from this deplorably wicked ideology. Doesn't matter. Race is not the issue. Race is not the issue. The wickedness of man's heart is the issue. And it shows up in people of every stripe. Right? Doesn't matter the melanin count. It shows up in every person. Cannot let it take root here. Colossians 2:8, beware. Beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the tradition of men, according to the basic principles of the world, and not according to Christ. Let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you for our time together. Thank you, Lord, for your word that is a sure guide to help us navigate through what are sometimes very murky waters. This worldly philosophy is no exception. Help us, Lord, to think clearly about these things. Help us to love one another as Jesus Christ has given us example and has commanded us to do. Help us to love you preeminently, supremely. Help us to seek your word for wisdom, Lord, and give it to us, we pray. Give it to us liberally. We're in great need of it. And help us, Lord, to be faithful to you as we address this culture, as we stand with the true gospel in opposition to this false hope, this false gospel of secular humanism and social justice. Help us, Lord, to be faithful witnesses for our Lord Jesus Christ, that all who are yours, may be gathered in from the four corners of the earth, and your kingdom ultimately consummated in the return of our Lord Jesus Christ, who will establish fully and finally his rule on the earth and will rule and reign with his people. We're grateful for that hope. Thank you, Lord, and come quickly, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.